Let's take a look at the Shure 302 Field Mixer. This particular mixer is probably about 20 years old. This has been for many, many years in the film industry kind of the standard field location sound mixer. So what's a mixer? Well, a mixer is a device that routes audio into the inputs and then out of the outputs back to a recording device, such as a camera. And all of our demonstrations will be using a camera. So taking a look at the input section of this mixer, we have 3 separate mic preamps that allow us to take 3 sources into the mixer, and we have 2 outputs that we can then route to our recording device. For the purpose of our demonstrations, we'll be recording to a camera. The 3 inputs are all XLR connections, so we would use a standard XLR mic cable to plug in. And we would do so thusly. Notice to remove the mic cable that there's a switch here, a little button you have to push in that unlocks it. Okay? We have 3 inputs here. And based on the number of input sources and how we want to route things, we would determine what we'd plug in where. Typically, we'll just use channel 1 if we're only working with one source. I'll put this down again. So right here, we have our mic and line source. So if I plug in a microphone, it goes to mic. If I were to plug in a line source like a mixer, I would put it on line. Same thing for each channel. Once you've learned the settings for one channel, there's simply a copy for each channel. The same information or same options are available on all 3 channels. The next switch over is our selector between the type of microphone. Is it a dynamic handheld microphone or a dynamic style microphone? Or is it a condenser style microphone? If it's a dynamic style microphone, we would set the input to dynamic, which is in the center. If it requires phantom power, which is typical for a condenser style microphone, we move it over to pH, that stands for phantom power, that's a positive 48 volts. And lastly, over here, the T is a setting that we will not use. That's for a standard that is no longer really used widely, at least not here in America. So we're just going to leave it on dynamic or phantom power, depending on the situation. I also like to add that dynamic really means off. If I had labeled this mixer, I would simply call it off, phantom power off, because that's what it means. It means that a dynamic mic doesn't require phantom power, so the center selection is off, and when I need phantom power, I turn it to the left to pH, which means phantom power on. Moving on to the 3rd channel, again, each one is the same setting, mic or line, and whether phantom power is on or off. pH, and this one is actually turned vertically, the switch on channel 3, just to make space on the mixer. The very last button over here is turning your phantom power between 48 volts or 12 volts. We want to stay on 48 volts. That's all the way to the left over here. If you can see me changing that, that's the other way. So all the way to the left is where we want it. We want it at 48 volts. So let's talk about the position of these phantom power switches in more detail. If I am choosing a microphone that requires power of some sort, it's up to the design of that microphone to whether it can accept phantom power, or it might even use a battery, such as our AA batteries, which I have a nice little collection of in here, right? A lot of microphones will run on batteries. Battery power is always more advisable than any sort of electric current. It's cleaner power. You'll have less noise, less interference. But the flip side is batteries can run out while you're out in the wilderness trying to shoot, and then you're stranded with no equipment to record with. So carry some batteries. If a mic can use a battery, use that as your first option. Secondarily, if you don't have batteries, or if the microphone design is such that it can't work with batteries, but it still needs to be powered externally, phantom power is your next best option. And most mixers have the ability, as well as most cameras, have the ability to send phantom power. It's 48 volts that go down the wire to the microphone and powers the microphone so that it can function. So this mixer, again, is no exception. It has phantom power, as we were talking about earlier. You've got the ability to turn it on, dynamic, and phantom pH to turn on the 48 volts of phantom power. So again, if you're using a dynamic mic that doesn't require power, you'll leave it off, which is the DYN, dynamic setting. And if you've got a condenser style microphone that requires phantom power, you move it over to the phantom power option if you don't have batteries or the option to use batteries in that microphone. And so, of course, the operator needs the ability to be able to hear what is coming in and what he's mixing. There is a headphone jack just here that takes a standard 1/8 mini jack, and that'll plug in here, and that's how we hook up the headphones. But we're not going to leave them hooked up until we need them, because they just get in the way and we might pull something or trip on something or put stress on the connector. All right, we've covered the input side. Let's flip the mixer around and look at the output side. This is the other side of the mixer. We have our two outputs, left and right, and that is where we're going to send the signal out of the mixer to our recording device. We're going to be working with our camera, which actually has a left and right two-channel recording input and recording capability, so this is the perfect match for our particular setup. These are labeled left and right, and there's pan settings on the mixer that allow which way the signal gets routed. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And lastly, this is where the batteries go. We'll show how to load those in just a moment. So you have to be extra careful when you are handling the mixer that you don't drop it onto this battery compartment. It extends out, and this extension makes it susceptible to damage. So be careful, and that's one of the reasons that when we work with the mixer, we typically use it and carry it and wear it in this bag. The bag is designed to cradle the mixer. It has sections for the cables to come in and out through the little Velcro here. And the cables will run out and the mixer will be safe in there, and the operator will wear the bag around their neck like that so they can see the controls. Also keeps the light mist of rain, if you should start to be rained on when you're on location, keeps the mixer dry and safe. All right, let's look at the front of the mixer. This is the area where we make all of our settings. This is where the mixing happens. The operator is able to control the various input channels. We have 3 input channels that we've talked about here with our inputs here. But let's lay this down so we can see it clearly. And I'm going to go through these controls on the front panel. Starting here on the left, we have our output for channel 1. This is a variable output knob. It's like a potentiometer. So we can rotate this. Obviously, all the way to the right is the volume all the way up. And all the way to the left, the volume is all the way down. The white knobs, again, are output. That is what controls the volume of each channel being sent out the mixer to the recording device. You see channel 2 and channel 3, these white knobs, that's why they're very big, because these are the 3 knobs you're going to change the most when you're working on set. The mixer will change this to send output of volume of channel 1 to the recording device. That's the output. The next little knob here is an input value. So it's spring-loaded, so you can push it in and lock it into place. And if you rotate it this way, you can increase it. This will be the first thing that we set when we're setting our gains coming into the mixer. Once that's set, we'll push it in to lock it in place so it doesn't inadvertently get bumped in the darkness of the set, or just with big hands moving around. There's a lot of knobs in close proximity. It's easy to move things inadvertently. By the way, I may have mentioned this earlier, but a mixer is someone who mixes these signals together, and a remixer is someone who works in the studio to combine all the elements of the soundtrack together. But moving to channel 2, we have the same thing. There's our output for channel 2. I'll turn that down, and here is our input gain for channel 2. It likewise has a little ability to be pushed in with the spring. Here's the output for 3, and there's the input for 3. So looking at our first switch on the left here, we have the panning option. It's either hard left, hard right, or center. There are only 3 options. This is not a variable knob, it is a switch. So one of 3 selections. If I have this is in the center, I'll move it to the right. So now it is panned, channel 1 is panned to the right. Let's look at channel 2. Here's its setting for pan. It's on the left currently. I'll move it over to right. And let's move it back to center just because that's probably where we'll need it. That gets us the right setting. I'm using the headphone jack as a fingernail replacement because I don't know if my fingernail is long enough to reach in there. And then channel 3 is right here, and it's already on center. I'll just leave it there because in most cases, unless I'm mixing in more than one source, I'm going to want my one input to go to both left and right output. Okay, now looking at this switch here, this is our low cut or high pass equalization switch. There's basically 3 settings. The middle where the line is flat. It means a flat equalization response curve. Flat, no effect. So when it's there, that's where it's currently at, nothing happens. But in some situations, you're on a loud set where maybe there's a lot of traffic nearby, or you're in a studio where there's air conditioning rumble, low frequency energy. Typically when we record the voice, a voice does not have a lot of low frequency energy in it. So we're going to filter out those lower frequencies. And this setting there is saying that at 80 hertz, everything below 80 hertz is shelved off. It is reduced. Flat means all the energy is recorded low to high. And then the last option is the bottom one there, which is 160 hertz. a little higher up. Depends on your content and what result you want. You can always equalize in post-production, so I prefer in most cases to leave it flat, which is the middle setting on all three of my channels. So now I'm going to talk about another setting that is not commonly used, but sometimes can be very important and solve a lot of situations. It has to do with phase of your audio. Audio is either in phase or out of phase. When two signals arrive at different times, they are said to be out of phase. So when I speak in the room, my voice moves through the room, and it goes right, in the case of my lav mic, my voice goes and hits the lav mic directly. Initially, there's some initial reflections, or I should say direct sound that come down and hit the mic, but at the same time, there are also sounds that bounce around the room and arrive at the mic later. My voice is moving throughout the whole space. So those later arrivals at the microphone, after my voice has bounced around the room, are out of phase. When two signals that are in phase arrive together at exactly the same time, the amplitude of the audio is doubled. When a signal is out of phase with itself and it arrives exactly at the same time, it is completely canceled out, meaning you'll have absolutely no sound. The problem occurs when you have sound arriving not exactly at the same time, a little bit delayed. You create various cancellations of various frequencies, and this is problematic. The mixer comes equipped with the option to turn your audio in or out of phase. That simple. You can also do this in post-production, but they've provided it on the mixer as an option should you need it. It's not something you'll need in normal recording situations. I just want you to be aware of what the setting is, what it deals with. Further information can be found to explain about phase and phase inversion and cancellation. It's a whole area of exploration in audio and sound. Okay, so the switch for that is right up here. This little guy here, this little switch here is what controls whether phase is in phase or out of phase. They've labeled it as off, which means in phase, the way things are normally recorded. Or if you want to flip it out of phase, you'll flip it up there. That means out of phase. All right, let's move it back to off because off is where we're going to leave it in most cases. I'd like to point out that the phase option, the switch to change the phase of signal, is only available in channel 1. As I mentioned before, it's not a very common option you'll need, so they've only supplied it in this mixer on channel 1. Channel 2 and 3 do not have this option to switch or invert the phase. And again, you can do it in post-production with your digital audio workstation software or editing software. The last switch on the very end here, this is a global switch. It is a limiting switch. It turns on a limiter. A limiting has to do with setting a level where when all your audio reaches that level, it is limited, it is shut down, so it cannot increase the amplitude beyond that point. It's kind of like a governor on a motor. You know, it keeps it from going too fast. In this case, the audio amplitude, the loudness of the signal is increasing, and when you turn that limiter on, when it hits that limiter, it's a hard limit. It'll just stop the audio from getting any louder, which keeps you from overdriving your inputs to the mixer. We're not going to use that though. I'm just telling you that's what the function is, and that's the switch to control it right there. So now I'm going to actually turn the mixer on before we finish talking about these other controls on this side of the mixer and the other knobs. We've already covered some of the input and output knobs and controls and routing, but I need to be able to see what's happening here. So I'm going to actually look for the on and off switch. Guess what? There's nothing labeled on or off. How do I turn it on? It's easy. You look for this switch down here. It says internal, external. That is our actual power switch. The reason why it's labeled that way is you can run this mixer off an external power source, which we don't have available for ourselves. We actually use the batteries to run it. So when I move it to internal, that'll turn it on. The middle selection is actually off. So if I flip it to the left, that's external. Don't need that. If I'm storing it with the batteries in it, I want to leave it in the off position so it doesn't wear down the batteries or drain the batteries. And if you store the mixer for, between shoot days, you want to pull the batteries out anyway, because otherwise they might run down on you. And then to turn it on, you're going to move this switch here to the internal position. And you get this crazy light show that lets you know that the batteries are working and that it's on. To change the brightness of this LED. It is variable. It has 3 positions. I'm going to use this little button down here. This little star right here is right next to this little button. And I'm going to push that in. And you'll see the little LEDs will get brighter each time. We'll do it one more time. There's the 3rd time. And let's see what happens the 4th time. Let me go one more time. There's our first settings. So the reason you might choose one of these different brightness settings on the LEDs, it depends on your shooting environment. You're mixing outside in the sunlight, you're going to need this as bright as possible to see the LEDs to be able to tell what your levels are properly. If you're in a darkened set, obviously you'll need the LEDs pretty bright, but you might find that all the way bright is too bright. It blinds you. The operator can't see some of the other settings because it's just glowing so much, or it's annoying other people or interfering with the actual lighting on set because it's so bright. So you might need to turn it down, dim it down. So next to the little brightness button here where the little happy sun is, we have our peak or VU meter selector, meaning changing the display style of the meters. And that switches, you can't see it because I have no signal coming in, but we'll get to that in a moment. But basically it alternates between mimicking the behavior of a VU meter, which is voltage, sort of average voltage through time, to a peak indicator, which is sort of a static. There's our peak level, the loudness we got, and then falls off slowly. So I tend to run it in VU mode because that's the more useful, true picture of the average of what inputs are coming into the mixer. We'll show you that more in detail in a moment. So let's talk about this knob here. This is the selection for monitoring options for the mixer. Typically the mixer needs to make some choices about how they hear the audio that they're mixing in and sending out. So I've got my headphones on. I never put the headphones over my ears as a safety precaution in case I'm ever hit with a loud volume spike. I don't want to damage my ears. I'll be able to hear them just fine from right here until I'm actually ready to start mixing. I need to plug in, which I'll plug in on this side here where the inputs are. So my headphones are plugged in. And then I would make settings with this here. Now, if you look all the way to the left, I'm now on 1. It says number 1. Now, let me read the settings there. We have 1, 2, 3, left, right, M, ST, return, and there's a couple more settings I don't even care about. Not going to be using those anyway. But let's talk about the first one. The number 1, that means channel 1. So when I've got this monitor selection on 1, it means I'm only going to hear what's plugged into input 1, channel 1. When I move it to 2, I would only hear what's on channel 2. When I'm on input 3, I would only hear what's on input 3, channel 3. This is important because when I start mixing multiple sources coming in, a lav mic and a boom mic, sometimes they're both recording the same thing and I don't know which one is which if I'm just trying to hear everything at once. So I want to isolate with my headphones over my ears, make the appropriate setting, and then I can tell and discriminate and listen for the detail of each input signal. After that, we have L. L is the left output. Whatever is routed with my panning on my 3 channels to the left side, I'll hear all of that and only the left side. So if I have a boom mic going into one channel and a lavalier mic in another, and one is panned, the boom mic is panned to the left and the lavalier is panned to the right, and I want to monitor between the left and the right, I put it on left and I'll hear just the boom mic. If I move it to the right setting, the right monitoring option, I would hear just what was pan right. In this case would be the lav if I use the setup I just described. After a left and right, the favorite position, the best position you're probably going to use 90% of the time is the M. M stands for mono. The beauty of this is that all these 3 channels can be panned left, right, center, wherever they're at. And when you put this in the middle monitor, M, that means you get a mono mix in both ears. Each ear hears the same thing. Makes it really easy to listen and discern what you're hearing. Disarming or unnerving to hear one mic in one ear and a different mic in another ear, especially if they're 2 different actors. It's really hard to hear what you're focus on really the quality of what you're getting. So by putting it in mono, you hear both signals layered in both ears. So that's probably where you're going to leave it, to where I recommend you leave it in most cases. After that, you do occasionally want to hear in stereo. So ST, left will be the left, right will be the right. But remember, these input channels don't have the ability to pan just a little bit. It's hard left, hard right, or center. So when you go to stereo and you have any of these input channels pan hard left, hard right, you're going to hear those signals hard left, hard right, which is why I recommend leaving it in the center, in mono. So I'm going to move it back to mono now because that's where I'm going to use it. So, and lastly, this is our headphone volume output. This little knob here, it's variable control. And just like our input gain, you can spring load that, push that in, let it click in place, and that way the headphone operator's volume doesn't get inadvertently changed once he's got it set. And that keeps it out of the way. We also have some other switches and buttons here. I'm going to unplug my headphones and use them as a pointing device again. So over here on the end, we have a battery indicator. We can just push that, and that'll tell us, oh, that we need to change our batteries, because I didn't see any green there. I saw yellow and red. It's time to change the batteries. So let's change the batteries. To do so, I'm going to take these headphones off my head. And when you're going to go into the battery compartment, that's this little guy right here. Unscrew it. On this particular mixer, this little chain here you see dangling is normally would be attached to that. Many years ago it was broken, and so we have to be careful we don't lose this. Don't let it roll away. The batteries will just fall out if you tilt it. So I got 3 AA batteries. These are standard AA batteries. I'm going to locate some new batteries. Here's 3 more. Let's see what happens. They go with the positive tip into the compartment, like loading cannon balls into a cannon. There's 1, 2, 3. Close it up, and the batteries are in there. Now, if you have any question about the orientation of the batteries, they conveniently gave us a diagram right here on the bottom of the mixer. So you know which way the positive should point when you put them into the compartment for the batteries. 3 AA's. Also tells you the kind of battery. Okay? So now that we've replaced our batteries, let's turn it on once again and see what we get this time. I'm going to move it to internal. That's nice. And we're going to hit the battery indicator to see what level we have going on. Oh, look at that. See the difference, how far over? Hit it again. See how it shows green all across there? That means our batteries are good to go. Okay, we have one more little switch to look at, and that's this shiny little silver one right here. This is a 3-position switch. The center, it's spring-loaded to go back to the center. That is off. And if we go to the left, we get a little special feature. I get a built-in microphone. This is known as the slate microphone. It allows the operator to make an oral slate to the recording device. It sends that microphone that's built into the mixer to the left and right output, which then is fed to the recording device. So at any time the operator wishes to make a slate, scene Apple, take 1, mark, they can make a note or slate orally. The other option is to move the switch to the right, and it is not spring-loaded. It will stay in an on position. And when you do that, it begins sending tone. We use this tone to calibrate our recording levels between the mixer, the output level, and the mixer to the input level of the camera or the recording device. We're using a camera, as I mentioned, for our purposes. The way you send tone, again, is to move this to the right. And when I do, you're going to see that immediately we have signal going out the output. This meter always represents the output signal from the mixer, whether it be channel 1, 2, or 3, or in this case, the internal of the mixer is sending that tone out both sides of the outputs, left and right. And it's sending it at 0 decibel gain, which is why our meter is showing, peaking right here at 0 dB. It's a constant 1 kilohertz tone being sent out the outputs to allow us to calibrate our 2 pieces of equipment together. So typically, the operator would make all the connections between the mixer and the recording device. We're going to be using a camera in our case. None of the inputs have to be made, no mic connections, because we're sending out from the mixer to the input of our recording device, which is our camera. And then they would state in a loud, clear voice, "Sending tone," and flip on the tone, which sends the 1 kilohertz tone out the left and right output to the recording device. After the calibration is made with the camera operator to make sure those settings are right, they would turn off the tone, and we're ready to move on to the next step. Now we're going to look at our mixer and making these settings we need, where we have a boom operator holding the boom pole, feeding into the mixer, and we have one output from the mixer going to the camera. We are going to use channel 1, and we're going to plug our shotgun mic into channel 1. The shotgun mic is a condenser style mic that requires power, but fortunately it has a battery inside, so we won't need to send phantom power from the mixer. I'm going to go into channel 1. I have my mixer off currently so I don't damage anything while I'm plugging things in. And so before we plug it in, we're going to make the settings we need to properly route our input signal going in. This is a mic connection because it's coming from a microphone into the channel input, so we want to make sure our channel 1 input is set on mic input. Other than that, we want to make sure our phantom power is off since we're providing the power from the battery, so I want to make sure this is on dynamic, which is the center setting. That means off. And now I can plug in my connection. Now I need to send output from the mixer back to the camera input 1. So I've got an additional XLR cable here. And I will find the 2 outputs on the back here. They're output 1 and 2. Since I'm only going to send 1 output in all of these different recording configurations we're going to be doing today, I'll only need to use the first one, which is the left. There's our left output. It's in there good and snug. So now I'm ready to turn the mixer on. Go from external to internal. A little light show there to show the mixer's on. Now that it's on, we're ready to start setting levels. Now, I'll need to be able to see the front panel. I'm going to try to set this here where I can see it. And I'm going to do sort of a cheat here. I'm going to take my shotgun mic and hold it out in front of me like this. The first thing I want to do is set my input gain. That is done by this. So I'm going to turn down the output of all 3 channels. That doesn't matter. I'm not sending out. I'm simply trying to set the level of the mic coming into the mixer. That means this little input trim is everything. So what we're looking for is, see that little orange light there? That's called the peak indicator. It's telling me that I'm overdriving the input. If I turn that all the way up, it's going to be orange all the time. That's bad. What we want is to not see the orange, or occasionally see the orange if I scream, ah, hello. That's too much. Let's go down a little bit. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3, check 1, 2. That's pretty good. I've got it at pretty much the loudest performance I'm going to give. This close to the mic, it's going to peak there. Probably in reality, the mic will be a little farther away from the talent, so that'll probably work. I want to push that in and lock it down. So to properly set input gain, what I need to do is guesstimate the distance from the talent to the microphone. In this case, it's probably closer than I would really be, but I have to hold the microphone, so we're going to let that be our distance. So then the talent speaking in their loud voice, and we need to set our input using this little black knob. This is our input trim, our input gain, and it's a variable knob. And what we want to do, I'm going to turn it up too much. At this point, you'll see that it's orange all the time. That orange all the time means I'm overdriving the microphone output into the mixer, is overdriving the input of that channel. So what I need to do is back this down a little bit, and I still want to see orange, but I don't want to see orange all the time. Now, see, I just got rid of the orange, but if I yell, I got a little glimpse of orange. That's probably about right. I'm going to be right about there, and then I'm going to push this in. That sets the input gain. Also, pay attention to the fact that I'm not wearing headphones. I don't have this hooked up to the actual recording device yet. None of that matters. I'm just setting the input of the microphone into the mixer. Let me make sure the panning is correct. I'm going to set it to center. There you go. So now that my panning is correct, I'm ready to start sending signal to the camera. And that is done by turning this volume knob here. As I bring this up, I can see my levels hitting over here, and I want to make sure I'm hitting I'll turn it up too much again. So that is too loud. I'm overdriving this mixer, and it would cause problems on the recording end. As you see, I'm in the yellow and the orange way up there. I want to be where I barely touch, and sometimes we use the term kiss the orange, just barely get into the orange. That's probably about right. Right there would be probably a good level. If I were actually writing gain, I'm actually actively monitoring the output level by controlling this white knob. This is all the operator is going to deal with once recording begins, just listening and watching this volume level to make sure that the proper level is being sent to camera. Now, I also point out this is an analog mixer, not a digital mixer. Let's say in a scenario where the talent suddenly did get really loud and you hit that yellow or red just once, just barely went in there. That's actually okay. If you don't hear the distortion, it's okay. You don't want to stay in the red or stay in the orange, but it's analog. It gradually breaks up as you increase the gain in there. However, on our camera, which is digital, if you go into the red, if you go into what's called clipping, the audio is unusable. It's not forgiving. There's no gradual increase. It's good, it's no good. Here, it's this gradual progression. So lastly, we're going to set up our monitoring for our headphones. You're going to put this to mono. That's usually the best position where you hear it in both sides. I'm only plugging the left side into the camera, but I want to hear in both my ears. And then you're going to use this last knob, which is a rotary knob, to set your volume level to a comfort, and you push it in to lock it in place. So in this next scenario, we're going to leave the configuration the same. We're only sending the output of the mixer to the camera on the left out, but we want to add a separate run back to the boom operator's monitor pack. So we're going to use the other output since we're not using it to record. So we're going to come out of output 2 and run that cable back over to their boom pack. And that's it. That's the only settings, and that's the only difference in this scenario. The boom mic is still being run in channel 1. It is still being controlled the same way. Nothing else changes.